Welcome to Corporate Cafecito,
a Latin and business podcast where we share insights and strategies to help entrepreneurs and professionals thrive.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Corporate Cafecito. Yo soy Nayeli Suarez Guest.
Y yo soy Carlos Butler Valle.
So you're tuning in. It is now March of 2026, and March is Women's History Month.
Women's History Month.
Which, if I recall correctly, it started up from women's suffrage and the right to vote and just trying to move, just the recognition of the work of women in the workplace and in the house and everywhere that women are. And so this month is always extra special because, well, we're still behind the 8 ball.
We absolutely are. And, I think it's always important to sort of ground ourselves around a few kind of data points, right? And so the reality is that women make up nearly half of the U.S. workforce. Obviously, we have a global audience, so we can always take a look at that as well. But particularly here in the U.S., we have obviously that's major, right? And if you think about where that was 30, 40 years ago, that is, pretty significant.
What's even more significant is that in the U.S., Latinas are the highest engaged women in the workforce.
Yep, absolutely.
So compared to our other minorities and other, Anglo counterparts, there are more Latinas participating in the workforce than any other group of ethnic race.
Demographic groups. And when you look at women in totality, women make about 85 cents to the dollar. Obviously, Latinas make around 50.
I thought it was 51, but we make a lot less.
55 cents to the dollar. So there's obviously a lot of room still for improvement there. And, one thing that's, I think, really fascinating is the fact that women are increasingly the primary breadwinners in households. And so, one of the things I think about, for example, is how this butts up to conversations that we've had around things like the sandwich generation. And so if you think about now the fact that you're someone in the sandwich generation.
It's like 1, 2, 3 punch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, you are the primary breadwinner in your home. I mean, that is a really massive amount of, I would say, I don't want to say burden.
I can relate on all the points.
Pressures, absolutely. So, and let's talk about that.
Yeah, it is. It is really hard because I think as a culture, our expectations is that we be really good, wives, mothers, sisters, daughters, all these things, and then also excel in school, excel at work. And so the pressures, one time I was at work and someone told me, your skin's not thick enough. You have to get the same feedback as your white male counterparts. And I was like, no, I don't get the same feedback because I got the feedback of you have to be a trailblazer. You have to make it. You have to continue to push yourself. You have to want that next role. And I was like, I don't think you get the same. I don't think they go up to you and say, like, you are the embodiment of every white man. And if you don't become president, you will let down every man that works here. No, there were different pressures.
Absolutely.
And I think as women, we face it in the workplace. We face it outside of the workplace. We see it. I mean, I'll tell you personally, it was so hard to even know that I didn't have the capacity to be a room mom or go chaperone the trips. So in a way, I love Women's History Month because it kind of brings the focus on what we do. But I also think it also reminds us of how we are a community that still very much needs each other.
Yes.
And I remember telling the room mom, I was like, can I just give you money? Can I buy the muffins, but can you pick them up?
Yeah. You're teamwork.
Yeah, because it is teamwork.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just the real celebration within Women's History Month is that bond.
I don't disagree. And I think, Naila, you have so much amazing context that you can provide to this conversation because you've been a leader in the corporate space. You've been an entrepreneur. I mean, obviously you still are, an entrepreneur. You are part of that sandwich generation, as you mentioned. You are, I would consider you primary breadwinner, in your family. And, one of the things I think that is really important is just given some of the, let's call them changes around DE&I that have happened predominantly in the corporate space, it feels like there are fewer and fewer opportunities like these to be able to kind of, wholesomely sort of celebrate a group of folks.
Yeah.
And so when I'm at least excited to hear that corporations, for the most part, are still obviously focusing on doing things like Women's History Month, particularly, in 2025 going into 2026.
It's so sad. The DE&I movement or elimination or just the change has impacted women the most.
Yeah.
Disproportionately white women benefited from DE&I the most of any group in terms of hiring
Mm-hmm.
and promotions. The hard part is like now we have these celebrations, but they can't be for all.
Right.
And
Exactly
I
right.
think that to me is probably the most heartbreaking
Yeah.
thing because, I want to bring my whole self to work.
Yeah.
But for the sake of this, I'm only going to, like, you can celebrate women, and women is not ostracizing, but
Right.
you celebrate LGBTQ or Latinos or, Black History Month, all these things.
Right.
And it's like, now that's not
Yeah.
okay.
Unfortunately, it's become, I think, a little too political, right? It's
Yeah.
become politicized when in reality, it's meant to be an opportunity to
To
recognize, to
celebrate,
celebrate.
to,
Yeah.
yeah. And like you said, recognize the contributions. And I think when we think about the contributions of women, one, we made every man.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Check.
right? But we're still behind. We're still behind. We're still
Yeah.
behind in terms of promotions.
Yeah.
We're still behind in terms of representation. We're still not on boards.
Mm-hmm.
Um, not enough of us. And I also think it's very hard for the women who are in those seats to be the one and only.
Yeah. I
Like
was
at
gonna
some point,
say.
that's exhausting. At some point, we're
Yeah.
just like, you know what? Forget it.
Yeah, I think about, for example, the NASDAQ requirements around board representation that have now been completely dismantled. That means that maybe at some point you started out as the only one, but then it grew. But now companies don't have the same sort of drive
Right.
to include these types of, I would say, diverse perspectives into the conversation, and so maybe they will go back to being the one and only again. And you brought up something that I think is important, which is really to talk about the progress, because I do think it's important. It's not all doom and gloom. There is obviously a lot of opportunity, but some of the stats that I have here, for example, are the fact that women earn more bachelor's degrees than men in the United States, which I think is
We love to
fantastic.
learn.
Right? Yeah.
I
Um,
generalize, but I
no, and
think a lot of us do like to learn.
I remember, I think it was in like around 2009, 2008 was when I was starting my first job in higher education. And we had just started to notice that the trend was changing a little bit from even a master's degree program. But at some point, we had classes where over 50% of the
Wow,
students
that's
were women, which is amazing,
amazing.
right? I remember in one class, we had close to like 85% of the people that were in the class were women. So it doesn't stop at just the bachelor's degree. We're obviously seeing a little bit more of that, in a master's and PhD level. But that's
When
a good thing, right?
yeah, well, when I was getting my master's and it was 2005, um, and I remember they said only 4% of the people getting their masters were Latinos. And of that, I can't remember, it was like less than half a percent were women.
Mm-hmm.
And so to hear these numbers is so encouraging
Yeah.
because it's like we're making those leaps. We're getting
Yeah.
educated. I will say this, and I'm going to sound like such a Debbie Downer, but like maybe the reason why women are getting more bachelor's degrees is because we're still not feeling comfortable in trade schools.
I Tell me more about that.
Like if you think about, I don't know how challenging it would be to get into a union
Yeah.
or an electrician
Right. Or to find job
apprenticeship.
once you go through all that work. Right. Absolutely.
Because if you look at those fields, they're still completely
They're very male
very male
dominated.
dominated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I completely agree with you. I think there's an opportunity there. And, one of the things that, we talked about the representation of women
Hmm.
in the corporate, sort of U.S. workforce. But the other thing, and I think this is true, obviously for specifically Latinas, they are the single fastest growing group of entrepreneurs,
Yes, we
right?
are.
And
Yes, we
so,
are.
when we think about
If
that,
you don't let us in, we'll build it ourselves.
right, but what if you did want to start a plumbing company as an entrepreneur and you're a
Yeah.
Latina? Like, now you've got sort of two layers that you sort of have to get through, in addition to maybe getting support from your family to even like not necessarily go get a bachelor's degree, but instead go and pursue, trade school. So I think that's actually a really good point. Maybe there's a
There's a
whole
whole segment
maybe, yeah,
there.
maybe we
Yeah.
bring someone in who can
That's
actually
a
do
great
that. Yeah,
idea.
because I
That's a
think
great
like I
idea.
think about construction, I think about some of these other
Hmm.
industries where I know, and some very powerful women, but like there just aren't enough, right? So
Yeah.
we need to do more of that, open more doors. This one's I think interesting because the timeline horizon is so long. But back in 1980, roughly 13% of women were in high paying professions compared to today, which is roughly 35%. Now, is
Wow.
that progress? Yes. Has that been
Is that
fast enough?
enough progress, right?
No.
I will say I'll play devil's advocate a little bit, but like think about the recessions that we've had, right?
Yeah.
So 2001, 2008, the pandemic, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I wonder if that has influenced because a lot of during the pandemic, a lot of people have struggled to get back out there.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that I'm personally passionate about is particularly those
Hmm.
folks. And now, again, talking about the sandwich generation, Latinas are being impacted the most and having to leave the workforce at the
To
highest
take care of
rates
our
to
parents,
take
to take care
care
of our kids,
of
to take care of our
exactly
families.
what are we doing right now in corporate spaces to allow for a better, more
Yeah.
efficient, faster return for these people, or are we penalizing them, right? I mean, and that's certainly something that I think about future Women's History Months. Like, I love the celebration part of it, but I always think that it should be accompanied with like, what are we going to do about
You know
this?
what? I think that's such a crazy question. I'm going to tell you why. Because when you were saying that, like we've had to leave the workplace, right? And I left my trucking company because I wanted to be able to help my parents.
Hmm.
And it was just the right time to exit. But I think about that, and I'm like, was I penalized, or did I prioritize what was more important to me at the time? Right? Like I
It's
don't.
a yes and though. I
Yeah.
mean, it could be a yes and, right? Like, I mean, one is about what you had to do, the other is about
Why you did it.
why you did it, and then how that's being sort of taken into consideration,
I know, but
particularly in
as a
corporate
Latina,
spaces.
let's say if they and this is my guilt, right? If they held my spot and then I had to take another 12 weeks or whatever, how would, like, I would feel horrible.
Yeah, I get it. I get
I'm like,
it.
I think that it's our culture is to take care of each other and take care of others, and take care of our families. I think the fact that I'm struggling points out how valid what you're
Yeah.
saying is.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much we have to do for women in general, but
Mhm.
I think again, when you're looking at the disproportionate effect that this is having on Latinas, it is absolutely something worth
Yeah.
looking into further. As we talk about progress, one of the things that I think about is obviously looking at your perspective as an executive career coach.
Mhm.
Um, what have you seen from a development perspective? Like, are you still seeing similar investments in development of women from an executive perspective? Because I think you've got the finger on the pulse. So I would love
You
for
know
you to
what?
tell our viewers like what you're seeing from that perspective as we think about this from a Women's History Month perspective
I have seen a decrease in investment in professional development
overall.
overall.
Okay.
Yeah, which to me is sad.
Yeah.
Right? On average, and this was a number from like I want to say like 3 years ago, the average spend for employee was $1,250 on
Okay.
professional development.
Okay.
And I wonder what that number will be now.
Okay.
This was post pandemic, but all those programs got cut, right?
Right.
Everything is now online. Well, you want to do that? Go get your sort of certification on Google,
Self-paced.
and it's free, or like LinkedIn trainings, which are all really good. But I think you're missing that connectedness
Yeah.
that is formed when you take a training with other people, or when we say like, hey, you know what? This is a group of future leaders, and so we're investing in you, and as a cohort you guys are going to go through these developmental classes together.
So you said professional development as a whole has gone down. Have you
Yeah,
seen investment in women
but
go
women,
down?
if women aren't there, right? If
Yeah.
they're not part of that leadership team,
Yeah.
if they're
Have you
not,
seen less of that? Like
I
less
have actually.
representation? Oh
I
gosh,
have seen a lot of women impacted through layoffs,
man.
through RIFs, right?
Hmm.
Reduction in force. And that part is very scary because I'm like, are they getting backfilled? Are they hiring more women behind, or like what's going on so that we can make sure that there's still a woman at the
There isn't a
table?
vacuum that's being
Right, right.
created. Yeah. That's disheartening. I mean, I'm just going to put it out there and
It's
be
really
honest.
sad.
Yeah, it's disheartening because I do think that, particularly someone who devoted, I think, a very significant amount of my professional career to open up pathways,
Hmm.
because we know that women are primary breadwinners increasingly, because we know that they make the majority of financial decisions, because we know
Yes.
that they are the ones that are driving the economic discussions and decisions in the home. We wanted to ensure that we were getting those perspectives and keeping them.
Well, and they have shown that when you have a woman in the workplace or on the team or in the leadership team, it gets more productive,
Yeah.
right? It's part of diversity of thought.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so, in the absence of that, you're missing representation for 51% of your
Right.
audience.
And although women are not a monolith, right? I mean, and I learned that I always talk about, I don't know if I've talked about this with you, but I learned, so I was in a role when Roe versus Wade was
Overturned.
overturned, and one of the things that really stood out to me immediately was how different reactions were related to that, not just from men and male allies, but from women. And there were regional differences, there were generational differences, right?
Religious
But one
differences,
religious
yeah.
differences, but one thing that was certain was that there was no one thing that would define women as a whole as it relates to that particular topic.
Yeah, because we're
Um,
not in a vacuum, right? So you
right.
think about like women's um, history month, and it's like there's black women, there's Asian women, there's, Latinas, even within Latinas, we're diversity within diversity, right? So we have Cubanas, we have Mexicanas, Puerto Ricans, like we have all this. So it's like different accomplishments and also different examples of like
Yeah.
what the mother does
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like we could talk about this for forever, but
forever.
I do think it's a good continued conversation into what the gaps I think are, because we obviously have started a little bit with what some of the progress is. We talked about a very clear example. I mean, all of these years, and we still have women overall as a group at 85 cents to the
Hmm.
dollar, but we know that Latinas,
Yeah, are
black
in the 50
women
something
are
range.
are
Yeah.
still making significantly less. I think about the gaps when it comes to generational wealth building and upward mobility. I mean, so if you think about just, let's talk about that 51, 52 cents to the dollar, right? That Latinas are
Lo hacemos
making,
rendir.
right?
Right? Yes, we
That
do.
is true. But when you think about that, if you think about it from a compounding interest perspective, let's
Oh
say, for
yeah, those
example, right?
49 cents if you grab them, threw them in the, but here's the thing, I'm just like, it's so bad, and I'm going to give a shout out to our Latino men too, because
Yeah.
they're behind the eight ball too. They're
Yeah.
I think what, like 85 cents
It's
on the
still lower,
dollar.
yeah, but not as low as women, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just like, at some point we have to get to the point where if you do this job, you will get paid this amount.
Yeah.
And just remove some of those barriers, and like gender shouldn't be
Right.
gender should not be the reason why you get paid less.
Right. And I don't disagree, and I do think that there have been there's been some movement, I think, particularly in the
Mhm,
corporate space around things like, salary transparency and whatnot. Particularly if
mhm.
you go out and look for a job these days, you can, for the most part, see ranges that are available, albeit in some cases, some of these ranges like are up to 300% difference, right?
Yeah.
And so you have absolutely no
Yeah, it'd be like
idea
a
where you're
range of
going
like
through.
200 to 300,000. You're like,
Right,
how is that a
yeah.
range?
I think I
Yeah.
saw one the other day, was like the range could be anywhere between 80,000 and
You're like,
$365,000.
how? I
And
did
I'm
see one that was like 50 to 125. I'm like,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
this makes
So
no sense.
but certainly a step in the right direction, but I'm talking now about someone who's in their 40s, 50s, 60s,
Easy tiger.
who's potentially looking at retirement or staring down the barrel and saying,
Yeah.
"Hey, you know what? Like, I'm so pissed at the fact that for these last
I could
50
have made
years,
51,
I only
49
made
cents
half
more
of what my male
what I could have
counterparts were
made.
potentially, making. And what that means from a real perspective to provide for your family, to provide for yourself,
Yeah.
even.
Yeah.
Um,
It is frustrating. And, like, I think that to me, that's a cultural and a gender issue, until we could get that evened out.
yeah, yeah. And, it's not immune, like it's not just the US that's actually going through this, right? I mean, obviously we
No,
look at
every
pay
one of our Latin
disparity
American
in
countries.
every country pretty much, but certainly I think it feels like we've had the tools, or certainly at least we've been having the conversations
Hmm.
about making some of these changes that we
Yes.
could have, I think, made a lot more progress.
Progress.
And
Yeah.
I don't blame them when you think about the fact that Latinas are making roughly 51 cents to the dollar, that I don't blame them for wanting to pursue the entrepreneurship route,
Well, okay,
because
so
why
a
not?
lot of women,
Yeah,
after you hit the age of 40, it's harder to get promoted and it's harder to move up. Or that's the age, like between, like, I want to say like 40 to 50, you might get exited and you might
hmm,
be impacted by a riff.
yeah,
So that leads to a lot of women starting their own companies. And I love that, because to me that's like, okay, fine. Like, I'm gonna go do my own thing.
yeah.
And we do it. And I belong to several entrepreneurial communities, and I love seeing other Latinas and, running insurance offices and, like, starting their consulting companies
Yeah.
or making, cakes and panes and stuff like that. And so I feel that, to me, that's like the biggest way of being like, I'm going to take control of this.
Yes.
I'm going to do my own thing, and I'm going to do great. And then to lean into the community and say, hey, like, there's this woman, that I buy conchas from, and she'll put out there like, I made extra conchas today, and we're all like, oh, I'll take a box, I'll take a box. And I love it. To me, that reminds me of like what being in a community in a pueblo feels like, where you reach out and you offer each other what you have, and we buy from each other, and we just keep supporting each other with our dollars.
I'm listening to you, but I'm also imagining conchas right now.
I know.
I'm
I'm
sorry.
like, well, we do have
I
coffee.
love it. I do love me some conchas. Oh my gosh. I would say the last thing, from a GAP's
Mhm.
perspective, and we talked about this a little bit, but 13 to 35%, in terms of representation in high paying roles,
That's
particularly representation
embarrassing.
in senior leadership positions, is a mess. I
It
mean,
is a
it's just, there
mess.
is no better way to put this. Women are not going away anytime soon. I think
No,
it's
because
evident
then we'll
that
all go away.
that's true. I think it's evident that their buying power is going to continue to only
Yes.
increase. And the fact that we don't have these perspectives at the table from both a business strategy, but also a people strategy
Yeah.
perspective. I was talking to, so way back, when I was still in corporate, one of the things that, as I was talking to folks in the UK, they were already way ahead of the topic of like perimenopause and just menopause in general. Um, and as a man, it made me feel uncomfortable in the beginning because it wasn't anything that I had really sort of, I grew up with four women in my home, so
Then you've been
I'm very
impacted by
familiar.
menopause.
Right.
Yeah.
I've been in, and so, but I never thought about what that would mean from a disruption to work. Right. I
Yeah.
mean, when I hear about some of the symptoms that people are going through, and one of the biggest things that always struck me was the fact that, um, people felt like they could never talk about it. It's just as if, it's just like for a long time in the workplace, they felt that they couldn't talk about menstruation, right? And people had to secretly hide, and put things in their purse and like,
And nursing
and
and
active, yeah,
pumping
and stuff like
and all
that.
those things. It was
Yes.
always like so covert.
Yeah, and I think about what it would mean to have more women in senior leadership representation, to be able to say, "Hey, this matters because it matters to our people if they're perimenopausal or they're menopausal, and this is how it's affecting them. We can better plan for business this way. We can leverage our resources in a better way, so that they can, like, there's so much
There's
there."
so many things. And, I'll tell you, like, one of the some of the critique I got as a senior leader was someone, I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about me, and talking about something, and I said, "Yeah, you can do that because you have a wife, like a stay-at-home wife." and we're not a two, we're both of us work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I don't come home and like dinner's made and my
Right.
kids are home. Like that's a very different lifestyle.
Yeah.
I think it takes, and so this will be my challenge to women, is be the person you want the next girl to have
Love
experienced.
that. Yeah.
And when I had Mario and I was pumping and I was traveling for work and leading sales teams, I would get there and I would tell them, I would text ahead and I would say, I need you to find me a place to pump before I land so that when we get there, I can go pump right away. And I was like, some of your options include like a Starbucks bathroom, a Babies R Us, because Babies R Us had nursing
Oh,
rooms and
wow.
things like
Okay.
that. And so I was like, and so I'll need to do this, and then I need a ride to my hotel to put it in the fridge.
Right.
And no one questioned me, but I think that part of that was removing that fear of being like, I'm a girl, they won't know what I'm talking about like I was just like, no, I'm going to take my leadership position and make it one of role modeling
Yeah.
how we treat women in our organization.
I think that's a great call out for 2026
Yeah.
in Women's History Month, right? Is to continue that level of advocacy and, for our
Yeah, be
male
the woman you need
allies.
your daughter to work for.
Yeah, and for our male allies. I mean, I have a
Yes.
daughter, and I think about what the workplace will be like for her in 15 years, 20 years, and there's something that happens when we don't understand certain things. We run from them, we hide from them, we prefer not to discuss them because we don't like the discomfort. And I would love to challenge all of the male allies in
Yes.
2026 to lean into that discomfort a little bit. That doesn't mean you have to be an expert in perimenopause or menopause or
Childbirth or
childbirth or
nursing or any of
pumping
that,
or anything
but
like that,
have the
right? Yes, and
conversations.
like and
If
and
the woman wants to have the conversation,
right, or
or
but
at
at
least be
least
sympathetic.
right, be
Yeah.
sympathetic, but prepare yourself. Like take a moment to learn about something that you may not necessarily have thought of learning on your own. Like when I had a few friends that were going through perimenopause and we're talking about what and I know not to stay on this topic, but I do think it's a very important topic in 2026 actually. And I don't know if it's because of the group of women that I surround myself with, but like it's coming up a lot. And these are really successful women in leadership positions,
Mhm.
entrepreneurs who are like, I'm about to go crazy. And because I don't feel heard, I don't feel understood. I don't think the medical system is has caught
No,
up,
it's not
right?
equipped for
And
it.
so if
Mm-mm.
I don't get that support from a personal perspective, like something's got to give. And to be honest, I didn't really understand what any of it was, but what did I do? I went on AI, I went on search engine and I started just kind of like, what are the symptoms of perimenopause generally? And like, when does this typically happen? And how does this different from menopause? Like, and so that's really the call out here,
Right.
right? You don't have to have
Learn.
that conversation. You don't have to walk into a room and be like, hey, Nayeli, guess what? I just learned about perimenopause. Can we
Yeah.
talk about
It's
it?
like,
Like,
no, thank you.
no, you don't have to do that, but certainly show some, I think, determination and willingness
Yeah,
to,
grow,
to have. Yeah,
learn, honor, respect, do all the things, have the behaviors like know when to advocate, know when to be an ally, know when to push that person forward. I think that March is a great time to call it out because to me, it's springtime, it's rebirth, and it's reinvention. And I think that that's something that women do exceptionally well because we have to reinvent ourselves, right?
yeah.
One of my favorite quotes, for those of you who have children, is on the day that you have a baby, it says the baby is born, but the mother is born too.
It's a completely different, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think about just having to reinvent, to regrow, to change, to evolve. Like we are reborn all the time, and I love that Women's History Month is in March.
Absolutely. I There was a section that I had initially titled as like allyship,
Mhm.
particularly like for men. But I would be curious to hear your perspective because there's some practical things I think that we could be doing, not just in March, but really as we think about kind of how we support and show up for women in the workplace. And I think both men and women and anyone else in between can engage in this type of work. One of them is sponsor women for leadership roles, right?
Mhm.
Now, I know that because of what's been happening from a DE&I perspective, that's become a little bit more difficult. But I also
It's
think
not
that
difficult. It's not mandated.
it's not
And so
mandated,
they then
but people don't
people
have that
pick their
same,
friends.
yeah, they don't
Yeah,
have that
the
same
guys
sort of
pick the other guys.
push,
Yeah.
you know. But I do think that it is our responsibility. By the way, when you're sponsoring someone, you're doing it because you truly, fully
Oh,
believe that
you're
they are the
betting. You're putting
best,
your reputation on
right? That
their
they are the
yeah.
best person for the role.
Right.
So that should be a given anyway. But doing that and just simply speaking up for women when they aren't in the room and you're providing that level of sponsorship, particularly if you're somebody who is in a position where you're looking at things like succession plans or you're
Hmm.
looking at things like professional development, like advocate for that. Don't, one of the things that I think I always look back when to my days in corporate and I think like, what conversations do I regret not having spoken up? And that's certainly, I think, probably one where even if it just happened once or twice, I think about what the impact could have been for those individuals. And so as you think about this for yourselves, like what are you doing potentially to kind of advocate for people? I think that's, anybody can do that, right?
Yeah,
We
anyone
agree.
could do
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Because I think about, being the woman that you want for, for the next generation, right? Addressing bias in meetings. Again, this isn't necessarily only that male allies can do. I think anybody can do that. And by the way, it doesn't mean that you're addressing the bias in the meeting. It just means that you're addressing a bias that
So
occurred in the meeting. But
you
I would
know
love
what
to hear
I
your
always
thoughts.
do when I hear a bias, I'll pause and I'll be like, "Is that a fact or a thought?"
You say that out loud?
Yeah,
Okay.
and then they'll be like, "Huh," and because I'm like, "Yeah, biases are thoughts.
Yeah.
They're not facts." So if you can say like, "Okay, well, if we're making this decision, let's make sure we're basing it off of facts."
I like that you didn't make it punitive in the sense that it was like, you didn't say, is that a fact or a bias, or is that a fact or an opinion? It's like, is that a fact or a thought? Like, thought is so, I mean,
Yeah,
like,
it's not a bad
thoughts
thing.
all
It's
the
just
time.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I
yeah,
like that. Very good.
yeah.
Now
Thanks.
you have your specific thing you can say. Um, Another thing I think this is huge is ensuring that you're giving credit for ideas.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many women I've worked with that some of their biggest frustrations is that they will have private conversations with certain people and then all of a sudden they hear their idea being
Oh my God.
discussed
You want to hear
in a
funny
meeting.
stories?
Yeah, we always love funny stories.
So I wrote a presentation, and this other woman had asked me like what my thoughts were on this, and I wrote this presentation and I sent it to her. She's also Latina. She sent that presentation on to a senior leader who she was like, here are the thoughts on this and this and this. He sent it back to me and said, oh, this looks great. We're interested in your thoughts. And I said, I think it's amazing because I wrote it.
Oh my gosh, I love it. You were like,
And she wrote back, LOL, circular reference.
yeah,
And I was
no,
like,
you're
don't
like,
ever do that
mm-mm,
again. Yeah.
mm-mm. You're like, yeah, you got
So
caught.
every time I sent her anything moving forward, I always copied her boss.
And you put and you probably put your name on it too.
Yeah. I mean, like,
um, you know, I think this is something that anybody can and should do in
mm-hmm.
the workplace because I've heard plenty of stories too where there have been women who have taken credit for other
Yeah,
women's
but don't take people
ideas or
don't
anything
take
like that.
credit.
Just
Like,
period. Just don't do
yeah,
it.
you're
But
a better leader if you
if you
share who
share,
did it.
right?
Yeah.
And I think this other one is just a continued thing to do, but
Hmm.
advocating for pay equity is so important because
Hmm.
maybe that 51 cents to the dollar may not make as much of a difference today, but in 3 years'
Yeah,
time,
those
10 years'
49
time,
cents make a
20 years'
difference.
time, at the time that you go to retire and you're looking at that 401k or 403b, like it makes such a massive
Or SEP
difference.
IRA.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Right. What else? What else am I missing?
Yeah.
But I think those are all. One of the things that we love to do
Hmm.
is to talk about like practical ways that people can
Right.
help and support. And so, wanted to make sure that you all left with some key things
Actionable
that you could be
steps.
doing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, closing thoughts.
Celebrate, go high five someone, high five another woman. tell someone they did a great job, share the limelight. And overall, I think I always think about the sacrifices my mother made to come here. And when I think of Women's History Month, I think about her, I think about my grandmother, I think about the struggles they faced to get here. And so when I think about Women's History Month, to me, it's a celebration because of what I've been able to achieve because of what they had to give up.
I love it. My parting thoughts would be that to remember that Women's History Month is not just about celebrating the past, but it's just as much about shaping the future. Um, whether it's in business or, in entrepreneurship, whether it's in the trades, whatever it may be, it's all about, really shaping the future. And I think the more we can do both, we can and we
Right.
should do both.
Yes.
And the other thing obviously is, when possible, particularly now because across the board we're seeing, underdevelopment or less development, from a professional perspective, continue to ensure that there is representation of women in these whatever
Hmm.
development opportunities exist, because at the end of the day, it's only going to support your business
Yes.
for the better.
And go to the events. There's so many networking events. There's so many events with panels of amazing women telling their stories. Find one in your local area.
Gracias por compartir con nosotros. Yo soy Carlos Butler Valle.
Y yo soy Nayeli Suárez Guest.
Hasta
Bye.
pronto.